37 houses, 3 pubs, a church, and a school sat in a valley in Wales until the British government drowned every single one of them under 60 meters of water so that Liverpool could have cleaner plumbing. Welsh members of Parliament voted against the plan 35-1, and it passed anyway because English votes overruled them, and that is not ancient history. That drowning happened in the 1880s, and a nearly identical one happened again in the 1960s, and we are covering both. Britain has more ghost towns than most people realize, but they look nothing like the American kind with saloon doors and tumbleweeds. Ours hide in valleys, under reservoirs, behind Ministry of Defense fences, and on islands so remote the Royal Navy once dispatched a warship just to carry the last 36 residents to the mainland. A village where children were tethered to rocks so they would not blow off a cliff. A medieval city that sent 2 members to Parliament while it was already mostly underwater. A brand new housing estate built in the 1970s at a cost of £3.3 million of public money where not a single human being ever spent a single night. And the place sitting at the top of this list is the only location in the United Kingdom that holds dual UNESCO World Heritage status for both natural and cultural value. And the evacuation letter its residents signed in 1930 is one of the most gut-wrenching documents in British history. We are saving that for last. The United Kingdom is full of erasures. If you subscribe to the channel, let us count them down. Number 15. Godwick, Norfolk. Our starting point is one of the oldest ghost towns on this list, and one you can walk through for free. Godwick, Norfolk, appeared in the Domesday Book of 1086 under Ralph de Tosney, who granted it to Westacre Priory, and at its peak a small community of farmers worked heavy, wet boulder clay soil that never really cooperated. Fewer than 10 households remained by 1428, and a 1508 survey revealed 11 of 18 properties standing empty on the north side of the main street. One man finished Godwick off. Sir Edward Coke, one of England's most powerful lawyers, purchased the estate around 1580 for £3,600, built Godwick Hall in 1586 to clear whatever houses were left, and then in 1597 constructed the Great Barn directly over the line of the main village street. That was not an accident. That was a deliberate message that the village had no future. And this is the detail that sticks. When Coke demolished the Church of All Saints in the early 1600s, he kept the 13th century tower standing as a decorative folly, which has been described as possibly the earliest recorded folly in England. A lawyer tore down a church but kept the tower because it looked nice from his window. Those earthworks survive in extraordinary condition because the land has been grazed by sheep and never plowed, so you can still trace sunken streets up to 7 meters wide, property boundaries, and medieval building platforms all visible in the grass. The Great Barn has since been restored and now operates as a wedding venue, and a free visitor trail with 6 interpretation panels opened in 2019. The Garner family has served as custodians of the site since 1928. People get married on top of a medieval village. That is Norfolk for you. Number 14. Hound Tor, Devon. A lawyer killed Godwick, but weather killed this next one. Hound Tor, deserted medieval village, sits between 340 and 350 meters elevation on Dartmoor's eastern edge, and the Domesday Book of 1086 recorded it as Hundatora under the Abbot of Tavistock, listing 6 households, 7 cattle, 28 sheep, and 18 goats. The timeline here jumps around. Bronze Age occupation ran from roughly 1700 to 1200 BCE before a cooling period emptied the site, and then the medieval warm period brought people back again. By around 1200, a permanent stone village grew under Lord Richard de Hundatora, and what you can see today are 4 longhouses, 3 corn-drying barns, and additional structures, all dating to the 13th century. Abandonment came between the early 14th and early 15th centuries, and the cause was almost certainly a double blow. Rising temperatures reversed, devastating upland agriculture, and the Black Death reached Devon in June 1348, wiping out roughly 1/3 of the county's population. Those 3 grain barns had been adapted to include corn dryers, which tells you the growing conditions were already collapsing before the plague arrived. Nobody stays at 350 meters when the crops fail and the plague shows up. Norman Quinnell of the Ordnance Survey rediscovered the site in 1953, and excavations ran from 1961 to 1975 under E. Marie Minter. After Minter died, Guy Beresford published her findings in Medieval Archaeology in 1979, and acidic Dartmoor soil had destroyed nearly all organic material. One single coin from the reign of Henry III, that is the total haul from an entire village. Hound Tor is also believed to have inspired Arthur Conan Doyle's The Hound of the Baskervilles after he visited the Tor in 1901, and today it sits freely accessible from Swallerton Gate Car Park, about half a mile's walk across the moor. Number 13. Ravenser Odd, East Yorkshire. A lawyer killed Godwick, the climate killed Hound Tor, and the North Sea swallowed Ravenser Odd whole. Founded around 1235 by the Count of Aumale on shifting sandbanks at the mouth of the Humber estuary, this place grew into a lawless medieval port with over 100 houses, a mayor, a court, a prison, a chapel, 2 windmills, a tannery, and wharves. 2 members represented it at the Model Parliament of Edward I in 1295, and it received a borough charter on the 1st of April 1299, the exact same day as Kingston upon Hull. £264 is what the charter cost the townspeople, compared to £100 paid by Hull, plus a further £300 for fair rights. Morality ran about as deep as the sandbank they built on. Records from 1319 describe men boarding a German ship, killing its captain, throwing the crew overboard, and selling the stolen goods right there in town. One property owner named Cecily de Selby held 145 houses, which is an astonishing number for a settlement on a sandbar. The medieval Moe Abbey Chronicle recorded that Ravenser Odd, quote, provoked the wrath of God against itself beyond measure through, quote, wrongdoing on the sea by its wicked works and piracies. And that wrath arrived as seawater. A 1346 Royal Inquisition found 2/3 of the town already destroyed, and by 1355, erosion had exposed the chapel yard so badly that, quote, the corpses and bones of the dead there horribly appeared. The Grota Mandrenka of January 1362, a storm that killed roughly 25,000 people across northern Europe, delivered the final blow. No confirmed archaeological remains have turned up yet. Local historian Phil Matheson has been working since 2021 with Professor Daniel Parsons of Hull University, scanning the seafloor with multi-beam echo sounder technology. Surveys in 2022 searched too far east, but lobster fishermen keep reporting seabed disturbances at low tide. Parsons framed the modern relevance this way, quote, as we think about the impacts of climate change, we have to think about the potential loss of settlements. We are talking a meter's sea level rise by the end of the century. That coastline, the Holderness Coast, currently retreats at roughly 2 meters per year, making it the fastest eroding stretch in Europe. Yorkshire's Atlantis is still out there, and nobody has pinpointed it yet. Number 12. Cwmorthin, Gwynedd. Medieval villages vanished over centuries, but the next category collapsed within decades, and the cause was industrial. Cwmorthin sits in the mountains above Tanygrisiau, near Blaenau Festiniog in North Wales, where quarrying kicked off in 1810 under the Casson family. By the 1860s, a community had taken root, with 8 dressed stone houses forming Cwmorthin Terrace and Capel Tiberius, an independent chapel built in 1866 for 100 worshippers. Roughly 200 people called the valley home at its peak. Production numbers tell the story cold. Output surged from 350 tons of finished slate in 1862 to 12,500 tons by 1876, with about 1 million tons of rock extracted overall. And this is where the nickname comes from. 21 workers died between 1875 and 1893 from a workforce of roughly 550. People called it the slaughterhouse. A landmark 1875 test case forced slate quarries under the 1872 Metalliferous Mines Regulation Act after the operators tried to argue that safety regulations did not apply to them. Conditions inside the community matched the danger below ground, with one family of 13 packed into a 2-room dwelling. The quarry folded into the Oakley system in 1900, the terrace cottages emptied during the 1930s, the final family walked out of the valley in 1948, and the mine did not close for good until 1997. What saved Cwmorthin from total obscurity was the Cofio Cwmorthin Remembered Group, founded by Mel Thomas in 2010, which raised over £3,000 in 2013, alongside a £10,000 private donation and a government grant to rescue the last surviving chimney. And this is where it gets strange. Cwmorthin now sits inside the UNESCO Slate Landscape of Northwest Wales World Heritage Site, inscribed on the 28th of July 2021. A place nicknamed the Slaughterhouse carries World Heritage status a century later. You can walk to it from a car park near Tanygrisiau, and the adventure company Go Below runs underground experiences through the mine itself. Number 11. Badbea, Caithness. Badbea, pronounced Badbea, belongs to a rare category, a settlement created by clearance rather than destroyed by it. Displaced families started arriving from 1792 onward, forced onto precipitous slopes above the cliffs of Berrydale on the Caithness coast. Sir John Sinclair of Ulster evicted 12 families, roughly 80 people, from nearby Ousdale in 1802 and pushed them to Badbea, with further waves arriving in 1804 and 1830. And now the detail that everyone latches onto. The most frequently repeated claim about Badbea is that villagers tethered their children and livestock to rocks to stop them blowing over the cliffs, and multiple sources report this, though some flag it as reputed rather than firmly documented. Literal or legendary, it captures the reality of a near vertical clifftop, where Atlantic gales are just part of the daily routine. Herring fishing kept the men occupied, fish gutting sustained the women, and illegal whiskey stills supplemented both. John Sutherland, known locally as John Badbea and born in 1789, served the community as lay preacher, healer, and timekeeper since he owned the only watch. Writing in 1855, he put it this way, quote, "This is a weary and dreary wilderness. The mirth of the land is gone. Everything is out of order." Population peaked somewhere between 60 and 100 before declining through the 1850s, and the last resident walked away around 1911. David Sutherland, a descendant of emigrants who had reached New Zealand, returned in 1912 and erected a stone monument using stones from John Sutherland's house. 16 ruined buildings survive today, freely accessible from a car park off the A9 on the popular North Coast 500 route, about a quarter-mile's walk to the monument. A community born from eviction, finished off by the elements. Number 10. Mingulay, Outer Hebrides. From the Caithness cliffs, we jump to an island even more cut off from the world. Mingulay lies 22 kilometers south of Barra, with sea cliffs pushing up to 213 meters, and its name traces back to Old Norse, Mingulay, meaning Big Island. Final abandonment came in the summer of 1912, after gradual departures from 1907, and the 1881 census counted roughly 150 people living in this Gaelic-speaking Roman Catholic community at its height. Compounding disasters drove the collapse. The 1897 Powys boat disaster claimed a crew of 5, wiping out more than half of Powys' adult men and traumatizing the entire Southern Isles. Mingulay lacked any sheltered landing, which meant the island could sit unreachable for weeks at a time, and absentee landlord Lady Gordon Cathcart showed up exactly once during her 54-year tenure, starting in 1878. April 1910 brought the school closure. Morag Campbell Finlayson, still living on Mingulay in 1905, wrote the words, "We spend the winter months lonely and dull. I am hoping to leave Mingulay soon." She left 2 months later. The Vatersay land raids of 1906 to 1907, partly led by Mingulay families, opened an exit route, and the last households departed for Vatersay by 1912. And here is something that catches most people off guard. The famous Mingulay boat song is not a traditional folk song at all. It was composed in 1938 by Sir Hugh S. Roberton. The National Trust for Scotland acquired the island in 2000, and visitors can reach it by boat from Barra when weather allows. An Iron Age fort and a 2,000-year-old midden still survive. There is also the legend of McPhee's Hill, named after a rent collector who arrived to find every single resident dead of plague, and when his shipmates refused to let him back on board, he survived alone on the island for a year, scanning the sea daily for rescue. Number 9. Galboly, County Antrim. From the outer Scottish islands we cross to Northern Ireland, where Galboly perches in the hills above Garran Point on the Antrim Coast Road. Frequently described as the last deserted clachan in Northern Ireland, it held nearly 60 inhabitants in 1841 and 78 people spread across 22 houses in the 1901 census, mostly subsistence farmers with a handful employed at the nearby Garran Tower estate. Agricultural mechanization could not reach the steep mountainside, and the pull of urban employment drew people away until roughly 6 residents remained by the 1950s. And this is where the story takes a turn nobody sees coming. From around 1970 until February 2013, the sole inhabitant of Galboly was Brother Vader O'Kane, a Cistercian monk from Portglenone Abbey who received permission to leave the monastery and live as a hermit. His cottage contained no cooker, no running water, and no toilet, just a table, a chair, and a small bed. O'Kane told his family he never felt lonely, spending his days in prayer, contemplation, poetry, and wildlife observation before dying aged 73 at Antrim Area Hospital from bowel cancer. After O'Kane died, HBO turned the village into a Game of Thrones filming location for seasons 5 and 6, using it to portray the runestone in the Vale of Erin. A 1937 Ballymena Weekly Telegraph article had called Galboly a child of the hills, a child that has not grown up, a Peter Pan of hamlets. Private land with no entry signs surrounds it now, and it carries no formal heritage designation. A hermit monk, a Game of Thrones set, and a Peter Pan nickname, all packed into a single cluster of ruined houses on a hillside in Antrim. Number 8. Boreraig, Isle of Skye. Back to the clearances now, and this entry is brutal. Boreraig occupies the north shore of Loch Ishort, roughly 5 miles south of Broadford on the Isle of Skye. 120 people lived across 22 households in the 1851 census, each household working 10 landholdings of 6 acres, and Caithness was the predominant surname in the community. September 1853 brought the forced clearance, carried out by agents of Lord MacDonald of Sleat to convert the land to sheep farming, with neighboring Swisnish emptied at the same time, totaling 32 expelled families between both villages. And this is where the calculated cruelty shows. Evictions were deliberately timed while able-bodied men worked away at seasonal labor, which meant women, children, and the elderly faced the officers alone. Agents burned homes or nailed doors shut, and at least 8 of the 22 households accepted sponsored resettlement in Australia through the Highland and Island Emigration Society. 5 of those households boarded HMS Hercules, only to suffer a fever outbreak, with passengers dying before the ship even reached Ireland. The most devastating account came from Sir Archibald Geikie, a renowned geologist who witnessed the neighboring Swisnish clearance firsthand. His words, quote, "A strange wailing sound reached my ears at intervals on the breeze. I could see a long and motley procession. The children with looks of alarm walked alongside. A cry of grief went up to heaven. The long plaintive wail, like a funeral coronach." A scientist wrote that, not a novelist. A geologist describing what he watched with his own eyes. Boreraig's ruins rank among the best-preserved clearance remains anywhere in Scotland, with housing standing to wall-head height, well-preserved field walls, and a prehistoric standing stone. Reaching the site requires an 8 to 9 mile circular walk on foot from Kilchrist Ruined Church on the B8083, a route where golden eagles, seals, and otters are regular sightings. Local legend holds that a single slab footbridge near the village was lifted into position by one man, nicknamed Glagan Glún, or Knock-Knees, sometime in the early 18th century. Number 7. Rosal, Strathnaver. Boreraig may be the best-preserved clearance village, but Rosal carries the heaviest historical weight. Sitting in Naver Forest with a view of Ben Loyal, this township first appeared in records from 1269 and counted among the largest of 49 townships cleared across Strathnaver. 1814, the year of the burnings, Bliadna and Losgaid, saw Patrick Seller direct the clearance on behalf of the Sutherland estate, owned by Elizabeth, 19th Countess of Sutherland. Between 1811 and 1821, roughly 15,000 people were driven from Sutherland lands. 13 families farming 50 acres once occupied Rosal, living in up to 18 longhouses. Stonemason Donald MacLeod, born right there in the village, left behind the most devastating eyewitness account, quote, "The cries of the women and children, the roaring of the affrighted cattle, hunted at the same time by the yelling dogs of the shepherds amid the smoke and fire, altogether presented a scene that completely baffles description." During the Strathnaver clearance, Seller oversaw the eviction of William Chisholm, whose mother-in-law Margaret Mackay, aged roughly 90, remained inside when the roof caught fire. Rescuers pulled her out, but she died 5 days later. Seller stood trial for culpable homicide at Inverness in April 1816 and walked free, a verdict that still provokes anger. His own description of the clearances tells you everything about the mindset, quote, "A most benevolent action to put these barbarous Highlanders into a position where they could better associate together, apply themselves to industry, educate their children, and advance in civilization." More than 70 ruined structures remain visible on the hillside today, alongside far older Bronze Age cairns and Iron Age souterrains. Horace Fairhurst of Glasgow University conducted the first systematic excavation in 1962, and Forestry and Land Scotland now manages the site as a scheduled monument, and there is an active development underway. The North Sutherland Community Forest Trust submitted an asset transfer request in 2022 for 40 hectares at Rosal. with plans to build a small-scale settlement on adjacent land and improve visitor infrastructure. A clearance village might actually be repopulated 2 centuries after the burnings. That is either justice arriving late or the start of a very complicated planning dispute. Number 6. Bothwellhaugh, Lanarkshire. Coal built Bothwellhaugh and water finished it. Construction started around 1884 when the Hamilton Palace Colliery sank its first shaft, and by 1913 the mine pushed out roughly 2,000 tons of coal per day using a workforce of about 1,400, with 1,120 underground and 280 on the surface. 458 houses made up the village, including Lithuanian immigrant families mixed into the predominantly mining population. The Duke of Hamilton banned alcohol sales across the village, which meant 0 pubs. Mining tunnels reached underneath Hamilton Palace itself, starting in 1915, and the resulting subsidence grew so severe that the palace, once described as the grandest stately home in Britain, had to come down between 1919 and 1932. Flooding and pumping costs eventually became prohibitive, and the National Coal Board shut the colliery in May 1959. Decline after that came fast. 10 pupils. That is all the school had left by 1965. Evacuation followed the same year. Demolition crews arrived in 1966, and the early 1970s brought the flooding that created Strathclyde Lock. Strathclyde Country Park opened to the public in 1978. Former resident Tom Eady summed up the old life, quote, "People in the village made their own entertainment. There was no thought of going to different towns and villages." A memorial cairn bearing the names of World War I and World War II dead went up on the 7th of June 1980, and former residents still gather there for annual reunions. Since opening, the park has hosted 1986 Commonwealth Games rowing and the 2014 Commonwealth Games triathlon. When water levels drop, building foundations and personal belongings reportedly surface from the lock bed. An entire community lies beneath a body of water where international athletes now train. That is the British approach to moving on. Number 5. Llanwddyn, Powys. Bothwellhaugh drowned for recreation, but Llanwddyn drowned for plumbing. This Welsh village went underwater so that Liverpool could have drinking water. George Deacon, Liverpool's city engineer, arrived in the Vyrnwy Valley during the summer of 1877 and spotted a natural rock bar across the valley bed, a perfect foundation for a dam. Royal assent for the Liverpool Corporation. Waterworks Act followed on the 6th of August 1880, and the Earl of Powys laid the first stone on the 14th of July 1881. What vanished beneath the rising water tells you the scale of the loss: 37 houses, 3 inns, 10 farmsteads, a 13th century church, 2 chapels, and Unit Hall, all gone. Parish population in the 1871 census stood at 433. Every grave was exhumed and reburied. A workforce topping 1,000 men built the dam, and 10 died during construction, with another 34 dying from other causes. Valves closed on the 28th of November 1888. Water flowed over the lip on the 22nd of November 1889, and the first water completed the 68-mile journey to Liverpool on the 14th of July 1892. Britain's first large stone-built dam created Europe's largest artificial reservoir at the time, standing 44 meters high, stretching 358 meters long, sitting 39 meters thick at its base, and costing £620,000, which translates to roughly $90 million in 2023 values. CADU lists it as Grade 1. During severe droughts, the old village climbs back into view. Foundations, walls, bridges, and road patterns broke the surface during the 1976 drought and returned again in August 2022 when the reservoir dropped to roughly 60% capacity against a normal of about 87%. Photographer Phil Blagg captured the 2022 emergence, and his images spread worldwide. W.G. Sebald referenced the flooding in his 2001 novel Austerlitz, and the comparison to the later drowning of Capel Sealan in the Tryweryn Valley in 1965 draws itself. Welsh villages drowned for English cities, and that is not conspiracy theory, it is parliamentary record. Number 4. Mynydd Epynt, Powys. Eviction letters started landing at 54 farms and homes across the Mynydd Epynt uplands on the 2nd of March 1940. 4 months later, by the 30th of June, every last family had gone. Shooting commenced on the 1st of July. Roughly 219 named inhabitants lost their homes across 30,000 acres to make room for what became the Sennybridge Training Area, the largest military training zone in Wales. Cultural damage ran far deeper than lost buildings. Mynydd Epynt had been a Welsh-speaking farming community with chapels, a primary school at Silieni, and 4 droving inns, and Euros Lewis described the evictions as the death blow to Welsh-speaking Breconshire. Scattering those families into anglicized areas dragged the boundary of Wyfro Gymraeg, the Welsh-speaking heartland, further west. 76 years after the eviction, Welsh medium teaching was withdrawn from nearby Llanwddyn in 2016, the final linguistic domino from a decision taken during wartime. The personal accounts cut deep. Iorwerth Pete, founder of St Fagan's Folk Museum, visited an 82-year-old woman at Vawnlwyd, whose words became a title, Main Diwedd Byd Yma, meaning, "It is the end of the world here," which Herbert Hughes used for his definitive 1997 Welsh language history. Thomas Morgan, a former resident, returned daily to light a fire in his old farmhouse hearth just to protect the stonework, and the military eventually destroyed the house with explosives, delivering the message, "We have blown up the farmhouse. You will not need to come here anymore." J.E. Daniel captured the power dynamic in a single comparison. Quote, "Wales was more helpless in front of England's War Office than Finland was facing Russia. Only one original building survives, the Drover's Arms Inn, with its exterior restored in the 1990s. A mock German village went up in the Silieni Valley between 1988 and 1990 for urban warfare training, complete with a fake chapel bearing imitation gravestones, a bitter joke given the real chapel that was destroyed nearby. The Cofuch Epynt movement, meaning Remember Epynt, has painted murals and slogans across Wales, and Ben Lake MP, whose grandmother was the last baby born on the Epynt, has addressed Parliament about what the community lost. Number 3. Stanford Training Area Villages, Norfolk. Mynydd Epynt was not an outlier. During the summer of 1942, the British Army requisitioned 6 Norfolk villages at once: Toddington, Buckenham Toffs, Stanford, West Toffs, Langford, and Sturston, pushing roughly 500 residents out within 4 to 6 weeks to carve out the Stanford battle area for D-Day training. Every one of those villages appeared in the Domesday Book of 1086, and every resident received an explicit promise that they could come back when the war ended. None of them ever did. 6,308 signatures landed on a petition presented to Parliament on the 22nd of July, 1947, praying that, quote, "In pursuance of solemn promises given in that behalf, the said villages, parishes, land, and property may be restored to the lawful owners and tenants thereof." Secretary of State for War Frederick Bellinger defended permanent retention, and the 1947 White Paper locked the area into a permanent training ground as Cold War tensions mounted. Richard Parrott, grandson of an original farmer, put it bluntly, "They were always promised they could go back, and of course it never happened. For them not to be allowed back at the end was very naughty." 30,000 acres now make up the Stanford Training Area, still an active live firing range. 4 historic churches survive inside the zone, fitted with blast-proof sheeting, and West Toffs Church, restored by architect Augustus Pugin, hosts an annual carol service. A £14 million Afghan village replica went up on site in 2009, staffed by Afghan nationals and ex-Gurkha soldiers, and since 2022, the area has supported Operation Interflex, training Ukrainian soldiers alongside allied nations. Military occupation has accidentally preserved rare habitats, with 4,678 hectares carrying SSSI designation, and the BBC filmed Dad's Army extensively at Stanta. Villages emptied for D-Day now train Ukrainians. Tourists arrive once a year for carols in a blast-proof church, and 6,308 signatures on a petition changed absolutely nothing. That is the arithmetic of power in Britain. Number 2. Polphail, Argyll, and Bute. Every other entry on this list involves a community that once existed and was then erased. Polphail breaks the pattern entirely, because this is a community that was built from scratch and never occupied by a single resident. Scottish industrial history does not have a more expensive failure. £3.3 million of public money, that is what it cost to build this purpose-built worker village at Portavadie on the Cowal Peninsula between 1975 and 1977. 500 workers were supposed to move in and staff an adjacent North Sea oil platform construction yard. Beds were made, coat hangers hung in cupboards, a bar and cafeteria stood ready, a bank and hospital facility sat waiting. 0 people ever walked through the front doors to stay. Scottish Secretary Mr. Ross authorized the platform yard in January 1975 for operation by Sea Platform Constructors Scotland Limited, half-owned by Lord Matthew's Trafalgar House Group. The whole scheme fell apart for three separate reasons. Platform columns needed to be cast in one piece, but the design split them into three sections. Treacherous lock-fine tides made it impossible to safely float massive structures, and the entire industry shifted from concrete to steel platforms. Government spending on the Portavati and Hunterston projects combined reached £29.2 million. 1981 brought the parliamentary scandal. A Scottish office error meant the government had never actually purchased the land beneath the village, and under Scottish law, the publicly funded buildings became the private property of whoever owned the ground. An MP put the question directly, quote, "I maintain that the public are entitled to know why £3.3 million of their money apparently went down the drain at Portavati, while a speculator was able to make a profit over a few days of over 150%. The artistic collective Agents of Change turned the abandoned buildings into a graffiti gallery in July 2009, and demolition finally came in December 2016 at a cost of £300,000. Delayed because a protected bat species had colonized the ruins and needed rehoming. Bats turned out to be Polphail's only residents, ever. Revised plans for a Portavati distillery on the cleared site surfaced as of October 2022. $3.3 million to build, $300,000 to knock down, 40 years of emptiness, 0 occupants, and now someone wants to make whiskey on the grave. That is Scotland. Number 1. St Kilda, Outer Hebrides. Everything on this list has been building to this, and nothing else comes close. St Kilda, Heort in Scottish Gaelic, is an archipelago 65 kilometers west-northwest of North Uist, made up of 4 main islands called Hirta, Doon, Soay, and Boreraig, along with towering sea stacks that hold the UK's highest sea cliffs. No other place in the entire country carries dual UNESCO World Heritage status for both natural and cultural value. And on the 29th of August 1930, it became Britain's most famous ghost town. 36 islanders boarded HMS Harebell that morning. 13 men, 10 women, 8 girls, 5 boys, bound for Lochaline on the Scottish mainland. The evacuation was voluntary. 20 of them had signed a petition 3 months earlier, on the 10th of May 1930, addressed to William Adamson, Secretary of State for Scotland, with words that still land hard, quote, "We the undersigned the natives of St Kilda, hereby respectfully pray and petition HM government to assist us all to leave the island this year and to find homes and occupation for us on the mainland." 180 people, that was probably the highest the population ever reached, back in the late 17th century. 36 emigrated to Australia in 1852, cutting the community in half. 74 remained at the 1911 census, and by evacuation day, the number had fallen back to 36. 2 young women died in early 1930. Harsh winters compounded the grief, and 10 households could not sustain the community any longer. Nurse Williamina Barclay, stationed on Hirta from 1928, helped organize the departure. Before stepping onto the boat, the islanders followed tradition, leaving an open Bible and a small pile of oats in each house. A film of the evacuation preparations, shot by amateur ornithologist John P. Ritchie, was kept under wraps until 1979 because of Scottish office restrictions and now resides in the National Library of Scotland. What survives on Hirta is staggering. The 19th century village stands intact along Main Street, with 16 single-story cottages and over 1,400 Cleedian dry stone storage structures that exist nowhere else on Earth. The manse, school, and church remain. Ornithologist John Crichton Stewart, 5th Marquess of Bute, purchased the islands in 1931 and left them to the National Trust for Scotland when he died in 1956. Nearly 1 million seabirds breed on the archipelago, including the UK's largest Atlantic puffin colony and the world's largest northern gannet colony. Endemic species include the St Kilda wren and the St Kilda field mouse, which grows to twice the size of its mainland counterpart. Feral Soay sheep, a Neolithic breed, roam across Hirta. UNESCO inscribed the site in 1986 for natural criteria, extended it in 2004 for the marine environment, and added cultural criteria in 2005. The Ministry of Defence leases a radar tracking station on Hirta, staffed year-round by Cwmorthin contractors, and the last person born on St Kilda died in April 2016. Charter boats from Oban, Harris, or Lewis can reach Hirta when the weather cooperates, and NTS runs facilities from April through September. St Kilda is more than a ghost town. 36 people signed a letter asking to be carried away from the only home they had ever known, and the British government sent a warship to do it. An open Bible and a pile of oats in every house, left behind by people who did not want to go. That is how you say goodbye to a place when you know you are never coming back. Whether these towns represent a bargain or a warning depends entirely on your perspective. Leave a like and subscribe for the next data shift. We will see you in the next one.